Hello, I'm Africa 54 Managing Editor Vincent McCory in for hashtag The Yours. It's Monday, December the 20th. This is Africa 54.
In Sudan, hundreds of thousands march in Khartoum to protest the 2019 coup. Africa 54 takes a closer look at how President Joe Biden handled the unprecedented global and domestic challenge of the coronavirus pandemic during his first year in the White House. And Dakar Fashion Week promotes inclusivity.
We begin in Sudan, where people are continuing to protest against the military takeover. Thousands rallied in the capital Khartoum on Sunday to mark the third anniversary of a popular uprising that ousted long-serving President Omar al-Bashir from power. Emma McCarthy reports.
Hundreds of thousands of people marched to the presidential palace in Khartoum Sunday in protest against October's military coup. Demonstrators in Sudan's capital city were met with volleys of tear gas and stun grenades from security forces, as some managed to reach the gates of the palace. Medics said scores of people were injured. Protest organisers called on more to join a planned sit-in after sundown. Reuters was not able to verify how many were able to reach the palace. Footage showed those who remained being tear-gassed heavily. Protests against the coup have continued, even after the reinstatement of the Prime Minister last month, with demonstrators demanding no more military involvement at all in government in a transition towards free elections. A Sudanese doctors' committee said on Monday that one person had been shot dead in the protests in the Shargal Nile area across the river from Khartoum.
Emma McCarthy of Reuters fired that report. In the Horn of Africa, rebellious Tigrayan forces fighting the central government are withdrawing from neighboring regions in northern Ethiopia. That's according to a spokesperson for the Tigrayan forces, Tsion Gebremichael. The head of the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front says, and I quote, "We trust that our bold act of withdrawal will be a decisive opening for peace." Gebremichael's letter to the United Nations on Monday calls for a no-fly zone for hostile aircraft over Tigray, imposing arms embargoes on Ethiopia and its ally Eritrea, and a UN mechanism to verify that external armed forces had withdrawn from Tigray. Ethiopia has yet to respond to the letter. The war in East Africa, the East African nation has destabilized an already fragile region, sending 60,000 refugees into Sudan. Thousands of civilians have been killed, according to human rights organizations. And the UN Human Rights Council has voted to establish an independent investigation into abuses in the Ethiopian conflict after a senior UN official said there had been violations on all sides and mass arrests under a government crackdown. Soraya Ali reports.
The UN Human Rights Council voted on Friday to establish an independent investigation into abuses in the Ethiopian conflict. It comes after a senior UN official said there had been violations on all sides and mass arrests under a government crackdown. Ethiopia said it was extremely disappointed by the move and vowed not to cooperate, describing the mechanism as politically motivated. The resolution, brought by the European Union and backed by Western states, passed despite objections from Ethiopia. Nada al-Nashif is the UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights.
While some of those arrested over the past 6 weeks have been released, we estimate that between 5,000 and 7,000 remain detained, including 9 UN staff members. Many are detained incommunicado or in unknown locations. This is tantamount to enforced disappearance and a matter of very grave concern. Access by independent monitors has been a major challenge. Reportedly, many have been subjected to inhuman and degrading treatment and extreme overcrowding, in addition to their prolonged detention without charge, access to lawyers, or any other form of due process.
Ethiopia dismissed accusations of abuses and said it had already cooperated in investigations into the year-old war between the federal government and rebellious forces, including fighters loyal to the Tigray People's Liberation Front. There was no immediate comment from the TPLF on Friday. The resolution establishes a 3-member panel of experts for 1 year to collect evidence and identify those responsible for violations with a view to future prosecutions.
That was Soraya Ali of Reuters reporting. Now, what began as a conflict between the Ethiopian federal government and a local military in late 2020 exploded into a civil war in 2021 that has forced 2 million people to flee their homes and left hundreds of thousands in famine-like conditions. VOA's Heather Murdoch reports that the war continues to expand with displacements, ethnic killings, and mass rape in the increasingly devastated region.
By the beginning of 2021, the war in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, then more than a month old, had forced tens of thousands of people to flee across the border to Sudan. Refugees reported ethnic massacres, sexual assaults, and mass arrests. In the months that followed, the humanitarian crisis deepened in Tigray. More than 1 million people were displaced inside Ethiopia. Aid workers warned of looming famine, and the few hospitals not damaged or destroyed were packed with war wounded, including children who had been stabbed, shot, or become victims of newly laid landmines. 11-year-old Goitam lost one leg and now suffers from infection and nightmares.
I wasn't there. He was behind our home taking the goats to graze, and then he stepped on the landmine.
War broke out in the Tigray region in late 2020 between the federal government and local Tigrayan forces. The war quickly expanded to include other regional forces, allied on both sides, and included Eritrean forces fighting with the government. Both sides have been accused of massacres, torture, and other atrocities. Federal Ethiopian and Eritrean forces have also been accused of systematic mass rape. Hundreds of women and girls have come forward, and aid workers say many, many more have not.
All survivors say they raped by militaries, so they fear to their security. Because if I say about the rape military, they killed me.
A national election in June reestablished the authority of Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, who then had control of the Tigray region. About a week later, Tigrayan forces recaptured the region and the war escalated, now engulfing many areas beyond Tigray. Abiy has vowed to crush his enemies. On December 17th, the United Nations voted to investigate abuses by both sides of the conflict, including the reported mass detention of as many as 7,000 people allegedly sympathetic to Tigrayan interests, among them 9 UN workers. In the battered Tigrayan countryside, many say they have seen so much tragedy, they no longer fear arrest.
I fear nothing, and I will speak to help my people. I know there might be consequences.
Mass graves litter the northern Tigray region as massacres continue there and in neighboring regions. Refugees are still fleeing to Sudan, and many areas are cut off from humanitarian aid. Hundreds of thousands of people are living in famine-like conditions, and the UN now says at least 2 million people in 3 Ethiopian states are displaced. Heather Murdoch, VOA News, Istanbul.
The office of South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says he has returned to work after finishing a week of self-isolation due to testing positive for COVID-19. Ramaphosa, who was given a Johnson & Johnson vaccine shot in February, tested positive for COVID-19 on December the 12th and received treatment for mild symptoms. In the past few days, a nationwide outbreak believed to be linked to the new Omicron variant of the coronavirus has infected more than 20,000 people a day, even though the number of new recorded infections dropped below that over the weekend. The fifth wave of the coronavirus pandemic, largely driven by the Omicron variant, continues to its rapid worldwide spread, pushing some healthcare systems to the brink. In some places, government measures to control the spread is being met with opposition by those who say they have had enough of lockdowns and mandates. U.S. President Joe Biden is preparing to address the nation about the matter on Tuesday. VOA's Rasha Abasadi has more.
Demonstrations turned violent over the weekend at an anti-vaccination rally in central London. Protesters from a crowd of roughly 5,000 surrounded police outside Parliament Square during the United for Freedom March. Some carried signs that read "No forced vaccinations" and "It's all been a pack of lies." This follows London's Mayor Sadiq Khan declaring a major incident in the British capital following a surge of infections from the highly transmissible Omicron variant of the coronavirus.
We're incredibly concerned by the huge surge in the Omicron variant. Over the last 24 hours, we've had the largest number of new cases since this pandemic began, more than 26,000. Hospital admissions are going up, but also staff absences are going up by a massive level. So I've taken the decision, in consultation with our partners, to declare a major incident today.
Other major European cities like Barcelona and Paris saw protests over once again tightening restrictions driven by the Omicron variant. The Netherlands announced a full lockdown. Sunday, U.S. President Joe Biden's chief medical advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci, told ABC's This Week that roughly 50 million unvaccinated Americans may prove a burden on a virus-weary healthcare system that is already stretched thin.
When you have that degree of vulnerability, and you have a virus like Omicron that spreads so rapidly, it is quite likely that we are going to see in some sections of the country a significant stress on the hospital system, as well as on the healthcare workers who are getting exhausted.
Staff at New Cross Hospital in central England echoed similar concerns.
Initially, it was all hands on deck. Everyone was full of energy. But as the time's gone on, it seems like there's no ending to it.
Some patients at New Cross are fully vaccinated, a testament to Omicron's transmissibility.
Now I go to the gym 3 or 4 times a week, mountain bike, never off sick. It's just knocked me off my feet. Now, as you say, I don't think it's going to happen. I've been double jabbed as well. May and July I was jabbed. And they did say if I hadn't been vaccinated, I probably wouldn't be here.
As of Friday, the United Kingdom set a third record in as many days with more than 93,000 infections, while New York City reported its highest single-day count, more than 21,000, beating the previous high from January. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
President Joe Biden says defeating the coronavirus pandemic, both at home and around the world, is his top priority. VOA looks at how he handled this unprecedented global and domestic challenge during his first year as president, with this report from White House correspondent Anita Powell.
President Joe Biden's early days in office were marked by a grim victory for the virus. In the first week of his term, the U.S. reached 25 million cases of COVID-19, continuing the country's dubious distinction as leading in global cases and deaths. In February, the U.S. hit 500,000 COVID-19 deaths. In April, the world hit 5 million deaths. And then, just as Americans began to vaccinate en masse, and much of the world was still waiting, the highly infectious Delta variant hit. Biden has had to balance his responsibility to his citizenry with what he says is a moral obligation of the world's wealthiest nation to the rest of the planet. In June, more than 6 months after Americans began receiving their vaccinations, the U.S. began sending out millions of vaccine donations to lower and lower middle-income nations. By September, Biden described the U.S. as the world's arsenal of vaccines, with pledges of more than 1 billion donated doses.
And the United States is leading the world on vaccination donations. We need, as we're doing that, we need other high-income countries to deliver on their own ambitious vaccine donations and pledges. That's why today we're launching the EU-U.S. Vaccine Partnership to work more closely together and with our partners in expanding global vaccinations.
Critics say the world's richest nation can afford to do more. Some question why wealthy nations stockpiled millions of extra vaccine doses and why their citizens are getting booster shots when many around the world have yet to receive a first dose.
What they have done very well is they have committed more vaccines to countries that need them. They have committed more funding to institutions to help deliver those vaccines and for the PPE and other responses that are needed. They have supported sharing intellectual property. They have supported increased manufacturing in developing countries. They have used their leadership by example to good effect. And so I'm very proud of what this country has done and is heads and shoulders above the rest. But to be clear, it is not enough.
Overall, Professor of Medicine Dr. Tyson Bell says Biden gets a good grade for his efforts. But there's plenty of room for improvement next year, he said.
There are a few things that we need to do a better job of. The first is getting low vaccinated communities, encourage them to get vaccinated. The second is we need to do a better job of getting vaccine available in low and middle income countries. And the growing disparity is now, it's embarrassing at this point. We're 2 years into this and we still have continents like Africa that are at 10% fully vaccinated. There's no explanation for that and no defense. And then the third, really is laying the groundwork for our future response. Making sure that we have a well-funded public health infrastructure, that we have rapid response capability, that we have the ability to implement testing, and that we can separate the concept of public health from the politics that inevitably gets caught up in.
But he said this virus is a hard worker, and as the new variants have shown, it is adaptable. That means it might be around for a while yet.
I think COVID's going to be with us. What we have to do is get it to a point where it's not overwhelming hospitals. We have low hospitalizations. We have a manageable amount of deaths year to year. Sad to say it that way, but we need to be able to manage it.
The best way to get there, Bell said, is for everyone to get vaccinated. That, too, is Biden's most oft-repeated piece of advice, and one he very publicly followed in September by getting his third shot. Anita Powell, VOA News, the White House.
We are excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, the latest on the catwalk at Senegal's Fashion Week.
Join me on the next Straight Talk Africa as we continue our review of the news from Africa in 2021. We'll bring you the best of our interviews from this year, from a moment of African camaraderie at the Tokyo Olympics, men and mental health, and what Africa's young people really want. We'll look back at unfiltered moments and conversations with some of our guests in 2021. Join me, Hayley Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
While the COVID-19 crisis has dominated the headlines for a second year, the climate crisis kept intensifying. VOA Steve Baragona has a look back at 2021's major events in climate change.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
President Joe Biden's inauguration in January marked a reversal in the U.S. approach to climate change after 4 years of inaction from the Trump administration.
In my view, we've already waited too long to deal with this climate crisis. We can't wait any longer.
Biden set a target to cut greenhouse gases in half by 2030 and started taking steps to help reach it, says Columbia University law professor Michael Girard.
The Biden administration has rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement, has resumed acting on climate change, and his Congress has just appropriated a lot of money to go to energy infrastructure, and the U.S. is back.
But there's still a gap between the aspiration and the real actions that have been realized within this first year.
Cletus says Biden has struggled to get the biggest parts of his climate agenda through Congress and allowed fossil fuel development to continue. Meanwhile, the planet kept warming. 2021 will likely join the last 6 years as the hottest on record. Record-breaking heat and drought sparked wildfires from Siberia to the American West and Canada. Floods killed hundreds in China and scoured Germany. Extreme events are becoming the norm, says Center for Strategic and International Studies analyst Joseph Mikett.
We need to get ready for these effects to come in. They're going to be damaging. If we do our best, they will be manageable, but we need to be ready for them. And we're going to see more and more.
But scientists warn the world is failing to meet the threat. After a brief dip from the COVID-19 pandemic, greenhouse gas emissions came roaring back in 2021. Observers were pessimistic going into November's climate summit in Glasgow.
It is so decided.
But countries pledged significant emissions cuts, and wealthier nations agreed to increase climate funding to lower-income countries, notes the World Resources Institute's Helen Mountford.
We did see a lot more progress than many of us thought was ever possible. But at the same time, the second truth is that we just accomplished nowhere near enough, given the scale of the challenge and how quickly we need to be moving.
The planet is still on track for devastating levels of warming. Countries committed to come back next year with stronger pledges, Summit President Alok Sharma said.
Whilst we have reached, I do believe, a historic agreement, what this will be judged on is not just the fact that countries have signed up, but it will be judged on whether they meet and deliver on the commitments.
Disasters will keep intensifying as the Earth heats up, scientists say, but it's up to us to decide how bad we let things get. Steve Baragona, VOA News.
After internal Facebook documents were shared widely with news organizations, the question remains whether and how Facebook will change. VOA's Michelle Coyne reports.
Last May, as violence gripped Israel and Palestinian territories, Palestinian activists complained that Facebook had restricted many pro-Palestinian posts and accounts. Facebook said its software that searches for hate speech had glitches. But months later, evidence emerged showing Facebook employees had deeper concerns.
My name is Frances Haugen.
After an ex-employee shared internal Facebook documents with the Securities and Exchange Commission, partly blacked out versions given to Congress were reviewed by a consortium of news organizations. Some documents show employees expressing frustrations that suppression of speech in the region was common. Dia Kayali, who works to document human rights violations in the region, took note.
They know that there's problems. They're under-resourcing in them. There are staff that are pushing them to do a better job, and they're just not.
The Facebook documents give a rare window into how the social media giant struggles to manage its services around the world. Frances Haugen, the whistleblower who leaked the documents, cited the case of Myanmar. That's where a Facebook human rights report found a failure to stop its services from being used to foment division and incite offline violence. A similar situation is happening in countries like Ethiopia, Haugen says, where misinformation and hate speech circulate because the company doesn't have systems to police harmful posts in key languages.
What we saw in Myanmar and are now seeing in Ethiopia are only the opening chapters of a story so terrifying, no one wants to read the end of it.
A spokesperson told VOA that the firm cracks down on abuse outside the U.S. with the same intensity as it does inside the U.S. But for many activists, the Facebook papers' disclosures are no surprise. They have been complaining to Facebook for years about how its services are used and abused in the Southern Hemisphere.
There is a war happening on Facebook, and it's happening in a number of different languages. The quote-unquote global South is essentially a free-for-all of hate, polarization, and extremism.
Lawmakers around the world are debating whether and how Facebook should be policed. And activists want the company to disclose even more information.
We have to work together to solve these problems of content moderation because the internet is and must be global. So we need global solutions.
Facebook, which recently changed its name to Meta, has long said its aim is to bring the world closer together. The challenge is whether it can do so safely. Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
On to West Africa now. At the foot of a towering baobab tree outside Senegal's capital, Dakar, on Saturday, cameras flashed in the waning dusk light as 20-year-old Najiba Samuel strode down the catwalk to zealous applause. Clara Frank reports.
Dakar Fashion Week kicked off with flashing cameras and applause. As the first model, 20-year-old Najiba Samuel hit the runway. Born with cerebral palsy, Samuel was the first of 24 models of all shapes and sizes to walk at the 19th annual event, which has inclusiveness and sustainability as its dual themes.
I want to show other disability kids they could do it too, and around the world too. Like, I want to prove to other disability kids, you're not your disability, you're just you. And you're perfectly normal just the way you are. It's important because other disability kids are just outside, inside their houses, doing nothing. They have to come out and show them who they are. That's why it's so important for me to be here. And it's also fun.
This year's event took place outside due to the restrictions from the global health crisis. Organizers chose to return to the baobab forest just outside Senegal's capital to remind attendees of the fashion world's responsibility to operate in a sustainable way. Featuring designers from across Africa, the Dakar Fashion Week is one of the continent's longest-running fashion exhibitions. Fashion Week founder Adama Ndaye created the first Black Fashion Week show in Paris. She sets high minimum quotas for female designers and once banned models using skin depigmentation cream to promote self-acceptance. I want women who represent so many different things, more than just bodies, she said, adding that she chose inclusiveness as one of this year's themes to contrast the often rigid beauty standards of Western fashion. Clara Frank, Washington.
Good to see that all of us can be represented in fashion because we are all human, aren't we? And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us in Washington, thanks for watching.